Nope, we're live.
We are live now. My technical person has failed me yet again.
Yeah.
Um, Thanks for tuning in, guys. I am Vance Meek. You can see my Twitter information on the screen. We are starting a new show, or I'm starting a new show, I guess, and we're going to talk some stuff. We do a lot of sports talk. If you guys have followed me and Blake, my brother, of course, for a while, we've done several sports related shows. You guys know some of the other guys that you might see on your screen right now do a lot of sports shows and sports talk and writing and all that such. So we decided to go a different direction here, and we're going to talk about comics, which is relevant tonight, but we're going to talk about music and movies and TV and whatever else comes up along the way, just for a change of pace. Tonight we are talking X-Men. So if you're a Marvel Comics fan, and in particular a fan of the X-Men, then yes, my man's already dressed for it over here. I guess I sort of, if you want to associate Deadpool in with the X-Men, he's in the same vicinity anyway. But let me go ahead and introduce my guest that I have tonight. We're going to be go counterclockwise here. If you follow me, of course, you know my brother Blake Meek. He will be joining me as sort of a rotating in and out guest. Below him is somebody you probably all know. If you do not, take a look at around behind him, and you can see why I invited him on the show. Is a great collector of really cool memorabilia. Go check his Twitter
too
feed.
Many things.
Well, there's never too many comic book things, but he's on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. It is Joe Goodberry. And then dressed for the occasion, your Twitter handle, I believe, is the Marvel Hacks, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go follow him on there. And Brothers Comics, is that a reference, something you want to?
It's the name of our podcast, and
okay.
It's with me and my brother. So
awesome.
Yeah, play on the name.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I haven't watched it. I will go take a look at that. So you guys do the same. But we're going to go ahead and jump in here, and it's a little bit later in the evening, so we'll get started. We are talking about the X-Men, and I guess the best place to start is where we all started at, with the X-Men. Blake, you might be the youngest of the group. I'll let you go first.
The first thing I can remember X-Men related was actually not the cartoon. It came second. We had the video game for the Super Nintendo. And I remember playing it a ton. And that's the first time I remember really knowing who the X-Men were. After I played the video game, the cartoon obviously was the next thing I started watching.
I assume that the X-Men cartoon, and maybe we should just throw that out right away, is probably a pretty big, a pretty watershed moment for most people under the age of 40 anyway. I assume we were all, and you guys especially, more than even me, because I'm a little older, but I assume Joe, you watched the cartoon? I assume you did.
That was going to be my answer. And then once Blake said the video games, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I do remember, but not really. Because I remember like the Avengers and the X-Men arcade, and they were cool, but like it wasn't like my my thing or my favorite. Yeah. And then like the cartoon came out, and I was like, whoa, this is awesome. And I remember like at that time it was X-Men animated series, Batman animated series, Spider-Man, and those were like, I mean, you were watching those. How could you not? They still hold up today. They're tremendous. I've actually watched it with my kids recently, so I would say the X-Men cartoon was really the first time I knew who they were from other Marvel properties and Marvel things, and those guys popping in and out in different times. But they were never cool until that point.
Yeah, right. X-Men cartoon for you?
I think I'm older than all of y'all. So,
oh,
really? It'll go back to Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Oh, yeah.
Which is streaming on Disney Plus, by the way. And so there's 2 episodes where the X-Men actually appear. One is with Firestar, and then the other one is actually it might be the same one with Wolverine, and he's Australian, not Canadian. So that was like kind of, I mean, I was maybe reading the books at that time too, but like seeing them in cartoon form on like Spider-Man's Amazing Friends was just an amazing bit of business for us.
I actually started streaming that on Disney Plus here not too long ago to go back and watch some of the old, not just Spider-Man, but excuse me, all the old cartoons. I thought that'd be fun. Little trip back in time. Yeah, I'm a little older myself, and do remember the old cartoons. I was actually a big fan of the Shazam cartoon back in the day when I was a kid. I used to love that show. But yeah, the X-Men cartoons, and then we had a Foodland. It was the only grocery store in town, and every now and then they would get a comic or two that they would sell at their magazine stand, and I'd get an X-Men cartoon or a comic and a Spider-Man comic from time to time. So that was really my first introduction, which is actually brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, because for me, when I was a kid, reading the comics and such, when I could anyway, but I was a huge fan of the characters that I thought looked cool, which was for me was Colossus and Nightcrawler. I thought those were the two coolest ones, so those were always my favorite characters. That's not the same as it is now, but who'd you guys like when you guys were kids? Who was your favorites growing up, I guess, or your first favorite characters? Maybe besides Wolverine. I'm going to assume Wolverine was probably every kid's favorite X-Men. No? Joe, who did you like then, Joe?
I actually liked Cyclops, and maybe it was the leader part of it, but I also had an older brother, and he would like he was like, oh, Red Ranger's my dude, and I'm like, all right, so I guess I like Blue Ranger until Green Ranger showed up, and I'm like, I got Green Ranger, what? So like he'd be, he liked Wolverine. I'm like, man, Cyclops, I'll take Cyclops, and so that was just, I held on to it. You guys know me, I'm a Bengals fan, don't live in Cincinnati, and I stuck with him. I stuck with my man Cyclops through ups and downs. So
he's had a few
years.
Yes, he has.
He's been a little all over the place. Who do you guys like?
If you take Wolverine out of it from when I was younger, I'm going to go with Joe, too. I like Cyclops as well, especially kind of old school Cyclops. Like, he's really the leader of the team and such a strong leader out of, kind of after he gets out of his insecurities and stuff about with Xavier and stuff. Like, once he becomes full leader of the team, he's so good for a very long time. And, to me, on par with Captain America as leader of the Avengers, he just doesn't get the props.
Yeah. Blake, I should probably know who you liked as a kid, but I don't remember.
Obviously Wolverine, but if we're taking him out,
we'll get to Wolverine in a second.
Yeah,
I've got a whole separate.
Yeah.
Outside of a few people, he seems like most people's, especially younger kids' favorite. But I always, oddly enough, really liked Beast growing up. I think it was just that he was big and blue. And
yeah, he had a cool look too, especially after he changed. Now, if you don't know and you're not a historian and you didn't read the old X-Men comics, originally Beast was not blue and furry. He was just a sort of regular looking dude with giant feet and a really high intellect. It's kind of changed as when Chris Claremont took over in the mid to late 70s. There was a lot of changes. That's when they brought in some of the new characters and such, including Wolverine. But yeah, Beast was cool. I guess we should go ahead and kind of address Wolverine then. Easily the most popular X-Men, I think that's safe to say. Maybe not necessarily individually with everybody, but overall, he's the one that got the individual movies. He's the one that got the comic book series. If you read the comics, he's the only one that ever got any kind of extended solo comic. Ran for 180-ish issues. What do you think it is about Wolverine that made him so popular as opposed to the rest of them who were, popular as a group maybe, but not necessarily individually like he was?
I think part of it's his kind of attitude. People like the kind of anti-hero. He didn't seem to care, even though deep down you knew he did. He played it off. Strong, had the claws, hard to kill. He just kind of had almost a weird mishmash of powers, kind of, that didn't all seem to fit together, but just always seemed, and he was always there. If there was a lot of big stories, Wolverine showed up a lot of the time. So you saw more
to the forefront. You talk about, I guess, if you were to ask somebody random who name a Marvel character, you'd probably get to Wolverine within 3 or 4. Spider-Man, maybe Captain America, but Wolverine's going to be one of the first ones that people probably think of, maybe because of the reasons that you said. Do you guys can you picture anybody besides Hugh Jackman playing Wolverine? I guess that's a fair question since we are talking and we'll be talking about maybe in the future the X-Men joining the MCU and possibly needing a Wolverine. I don't know if Hugh Jackman at this point is involved with possibly playing him or not, but
Yeah,
like it's going to be, how weird will it be to see somebody else doing it?
Yeah, I think he's aged out of the role.
Yeah,
yeah, because I think he's getting closer to 60 than 50.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's gonna be tough to see somebody else in that role. I mean, he owned it, pretty much like Chris Evans did Captain America,
Yeah.
Robert Downey Jr. did Tony Stark. Like trying to recast those roles is going to be extremely difficult. But I think Wolverine is actually cool for one of the reasons before they kind of revealed it all is that his history was so murky for such a long time.
It's sort of mysterious, leaves you
wanting
more
almost.
almost.
Had him as the kind of feral character, the anti-authority, you Cyclops, I'm going to do what I want to do, like that kind of thing. And then over time, they kind of, took him away from being this kind of the wild animal, gave him a little bit more of his backstory with, in Japan, you got all that stuff. His secret ninja life that he had, like all these types of things that kind of built the character up over time. And I think like people that read the books for a long time, you kind of went on that journey with him. And then once freaking, Jim Lee or whoever redesigned him and all that, then it went off the part, now it just looks, the visual was so cool too. And at that point, it's just the horses out the barn.
I think a lot of people probably like him for different reasons too. Like you guys touched on, we're talking about like a dude that's 5'3", you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like you don't see that as a superhero, number one. So a lot of people probably look at that like, man, that's someone who doesn't look like the typical 6'3", 240-pound Captain America type guy. But like when I remember as a kid, I'm like, oh, he's cool. He's got an attitude. It's 90s. It's grunge type, setting and scene. And here is this guy who doesn't take anything, but he's got metal claws. That's great. I thought that was it. And then you're like, oh, he's got like some animal senses type thing with him. He can smell, he can hear. He's real hairy. Like this dude, he's a beast in that way. But then you're like, oh, it's the healing factor. When they go back and show you like why he's special is because of the healing factor. He doesn't become who he is without it. He doesn't get picked for the Weapon X program to have the adamantium fused to his skeleton without that crazy superhuman, crazy 10 out of 10 healing factor that he has. And that's what's like, oh, that's what makes him cool. And then you get the more soft stories that he's really, he's really putting on a front. He does care. He does feel these things. He's a special agent. He's a samurai. He's got all these, backgrounds to him and all these skills and talents. It's like, he's a well-rounded character. And I think a lot of different people find different things appealing.
Yeah. One of the coolest, a lot of people know, and maybe some don't, but I've been reading all the Marvel comics. I started in 1962 or 3, was Fantastic Four 1, and have been reading them forward. I've made it up to early 97 at this point. But up to this point, like one of the coolest visuals in all of the comics that I've read is when Magneto rips his adamantium skeleton out of him, and he still, then he grows the bone claws out of his hands, and it's just a really cool visual as well. And he's had several, and then of course, like I said, he's at the forefront. And, no matter what the enemy is, whether it's Apocalypse or Magneto or Onslaught, in that whole crossover, like he's right at the front, willing to no matter how big or strong they are, he's right at the front of it. Let's jump forward a little bit here because I want to backtrack. We talked about our favorites as a kid. Have your favorite characters changed since you guys were a kid? Because mine has. I have grown appreciation for a different character as I've gotten older and read more. Read more of the comics. Obviously, I have a new favorite, I guess, at this point. Do you guys, has yours changed? Are you still the same characters? Blake, you still Beast? You're still your favorite one?
No, I would say it's hard choosing one because there's so many pop in now.
The number of X-Men has grown exponentially since 1964.
I get it. Also kind of depends on, how you classify them. Is Deadpool, do you count him in with them? Some people do, some people don't. But probably the ones that are just, basically associated with him. I like Gambit. Gambit's one of my favorite. The Cajun accent.
It's a very hit and miss for people. I think a lot of people really like him, and a lot of people just can't stand Gambit based on some of the comments I've seen over time.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
And then another one I really like that I don't think gets talked about a lot. I really like Psylocke. I think she's really cool. the telepathic stuff she can do. And her visual is really cool.
Her history is interesting too because she's was originally Betsy Braddock, and then she was however you want to word it. But it was a ninja. It was kind of convoluted, but it was interesting reading through it anyway. Joe, you still on the same?
It's funny. Probably the opposite end of the mirror, or the opposite end of the coin, I should say, is from Cyclops is Magneto, and they're both strong-willed. They're both really cemented in what they believe and and how they want to approach it. They probably agree on more things than you actually realize, and just how do you want to approach it, and what's the safe way and the realistic way to live in this world, being persecuted and treated the way you are, and being hunted and yada yada. And for me, they are like Cyclops, like you mentioned, he's the Captain America. He's the civil rights Captain America, which is different, and then how Magneto takes it to the next step of, they're never going to treat us the same. They're never going to really, leave us alone. We got to take this from them. We got to, separate ourselves. We're above them. And then if you go like the last 15 years or so, they've almost swapped roles, right? They plenty of times they've had to, where Cyclops has had to be the dude that puts his foot in the ground and says, no, we ain't going any further. This is it. You pushed us as far as we can go. And Magneto's the guy that's like, listen, he's in charge, and he's, we're following him now. And it's like, so I have really grown my appreciation for Magneto, not from as a kid, like, oh, he's the villain, to like, oh, I see. He's not the villain. He's just a little more radical.
I think the way they've developed Magneto's character over the years has been one of the more interesting things too, because he's gone in the 60s and 70s. He was just the bad guy. And then they kind of developed his character more and showed why he was the way he was, why he had the belief system that he did, and that whole backstory with the concentration camps and such, that his family adds a lot of depth to his character. You still on Cyclops now, or have you got a new favorite one?
No, the turning Cyclops and the Racer X Cyclops, him killing Xavier. Like, that just kind of put me off for a while, and then they killed him, and then they brought him back. Like, it was a little bit too much of a departure from the character. It felt like a forced reboot of a character. You're like, oh, well, it's kind of stale. These are wrestling terms. Let's turn him heel. And I didn't care for that. Honestly, and Blake, I don't know how you could have watched the 90s and not been a fan of Gambit, because the design is so cool. The accent is so cool, and the character is so cool initially. But when you read the comic books and stuff, he doesn't really have like a definitive Gambit story. You know what I mean? Like, there's not you point back to this one story about Gambit that is something, and it's not really in the comics, And so, coming from somebody that started from a different spot, that is one of my favorite characters now, at least up to a point, is probably Rogue is my favorite character now. She came in, once she left the Brotherhood and joined the team. She was so scared, so timid, so whatever. And, to have her go from there to where she is now, a major member of the X-Men, part of A-Force, part of the Avengers.
One of the strongest characters.
Really. We're going to get to that shortly too.
Over time, and they've done it without kind of making her, her relationship with Gambit isn't, the forefront of that. They let her be herself still, where she's grown to such an amazing character over the last few years. So probably Rogue at this point in time, at least in my more recent comic book reading.
Well, her story is interesting too, because you mentioned that the timid part, and that was because she could literally never have any kind of physical contact with anybody, or she was going to wipe them out, which she did with Carol Danvers back in the old comics, and take their memories and everything else away. I like Storm now. I think that she's just, as I read through the comics up to at least where I'm at in the read along, she's really, she's got her weaknesses, and they're not like superhero weaknesses. She's claustrophobic, like extremely claustrophobic, and I can sympathize with that, because I don't like tight spaces either. But she's got human failings, but she's also as badass gets when it's time to need badass. So I've really grown to appreciate that.
Super strong leader too. Like, you can tell, she's second in command, but she could take that number one spot. I think if you really needed to stabilize that room or that mansion, she's the one you'd probably go to. I've become a really big fan.
Comes back to the team after his sabbatical. after Jean dies, and Storm is depowered at the time. She's leader of the Morlocks, and they have to have, he's with Madeline Pryor at that time, and can't really decide if he's committed to the X-Men or you want to commit to this family. And Storm takes him apart with no powers, like completely takes him apart and shames him to the point where he winds up having to leave and go be with his family, which is a pretty terrible thing to say.
Let's go. I was actually going to do it a little bit later, but let's go ahead and kind of flip to the other side of this. And I know that there's been some back and forth because, as we talked about Magneto, he's been the bad guy. Then he was in the early 80s, I believe, actually was the leader of the X-Men for a bit, and then he was the bad guy again. And then now he's kind of in and out. We've seen guys like Juggernaut and others. Emma Frost was originally a villain, and then good, and then bad, and then good. But who are some of your guys' favorite villains for the X-Men? Joe, who you?
I was thinking everyone would say the big ones, and I kind of said Magneto already as one of my favorites. So I'll go to I think someone who's maybe a little bit underrated, or we haven't seen him in a movie yet, so maybe that's why he's underrated. But I think Mr. Sinister should be the way they handle the next one, and just when I think of X-Men too, what caught my attention around that time is the whole idea of evolution and the genetics and genetic coding and how obsessed some people could be with it. And I thought when I saw Sinister, he was always seemed like that, just taking science to the extreme and too far. And I always found that interesting. And I went to college for one semester, and I was like, yeah, this isn't cool. But I did go and take an evolution course, and I always thought about the X-Men while doing this, because I'm like, man, I can see why this is so fascinating and so cool and so interesting. And so I always kind of sympathize, but that only lasts for very small, because he's evil. He gets to the point really quick.
He's the most villainous villain, whatever, really of all of them. I mean, you've got the generic, I'm going to take over the world bad guys,
right?
But Sinister's
legit,
he's
just
messed up.
He's got some stuff going on.
Right. Whenever they reveal he made a clone, it's oh my god, this is so messed up.
Yeah, he's up there in terms of just pure evil. He's right at the top of the list for me anyway. Blake or whoever wants to go next.
I'll go, because this is a book that we're going to wind up reviewing on our show not that much longer ago.
Awesome.
Coming up soon is Xavier as Onslaught. That is probably one of the better villains.
Just read that, by the way, about 2 weeks ago, the entire saga.
Yeah, the kind of mid-90s kind of thing, which came out of absolute nowhere. I mean, it was teased a little bit, but you definitely didn't see it coming. This is we had internet, but it wasn't that much of internet in '96, and it was just such a good tease. And they kind of retconned the story a little bit there at the end, but it was such a good story. Xavier as just kind of falling into all of his failings, finally losing it, that he couldn't control all of his evil desires or whatever. It was just a really good story. So Onslaught.
They set it up it was a slow burn setup. I said, I just read that very recently, and you would see little hints here and there of Xavier not being his normal self. He kind of started to isolate some in the mansion and stuff. It was a slow setup, and then it may have dragged a little bit in parts, maybe a few too many kind of side issues that tied in that they forced. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a pretty good story.
Yeah, and it traced back to Magneto ripping the adamantium out.
Right.
That's when he lost. That was the start of that.
Magneto. Yeah, that kind of set the thing up.
Yep. He did the one thing that he said he would never do, and that set him on that path. And then this is that's such. Well, that's Scott Lobdell, it's not Claremont, but it was such great long-term booking. To kind of get from that point to all the way up to, that's 300 and something. There's years of comic book storytelling to get to that point.
Good use of concepts too. It's a good story to there's maybe one of the real true good guys in the comic book universe anyway, with those altruistic motives as there can possibly be, and then the one moment he slips just a little bit and suddenly he's the ultimate bad guy, and seemingly kills a number of superheroes. Obviously you guys can go check that out and see what happens after that story ends. But Blake, favorite villain?
I got a couple. If we're talking about big ones, I really like the Dark Phoenix. I really like that story. She nobody can stop her. Essentially, I mean, she just
Killed a
rolled
few million
through
people. A billion people, I guess.
Just a few.
Or not people, but beings.
Yeah. And then if we're talking about not ones that are that big, I really like Mystique, and I think it came from the movies.
Yeah.
More than anything. But
she was a good character in the movies.
Yeah, the romance.
That doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah, the romance thing.
And then I'll always remember, it has nothing to do with the comics or the cartoon or anything. I'll always remember the "I'm the Juggernaut bitch" skit. That always comes to my mind when I think of the X-Men.
I think Juggernaut, and it was probably, especially as a kid, was my favorite. I just enjoyed the whole concept behind that particular character, and then Apocalypse was always was cool to in the comics.
Can I shout out one more just in case?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Shadow King, I think.
Oh yeah.
And I was just because I was thinking the animated series, and I think he really messed up Storm in that episode. And but I don't know if anyone watched Legion, and the way they did Shadow King in there was just really fantastic to see. I remember the comic when he's fighting Xavier, and they're in their minds, right? So then when you see it done in that show, it was like, whoa! Like you see it on print, and then you see it like visually, and he's fighting Legion this time. But it's like, man, this is trippy and crazy and weird, and you can't even like almost wrap your mind around a psychic battle like that, especially with one with such a evil entity that Shadow King can be.
I would highly recommend, if you haven't watched Legion, to check it out. It's a good show, but it's really like the effects and the way it's done is really solid. I enjoyed it.
And then I'll say,
a great villain too, by the way. I mean,
what's that?
Legion's a great villain.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that Legion quest, run that led to what Age of Apocalypse is. I mean, that's a great run there for sure.
Yeah, there was several really good overarching storylines that took place even though the 90s overall was not the best decade for comics. There were some really good stories, especially X-Men centric stories. What were you gonna say, Blake?
And then it's not not like a single person, but I always remember the Sentinels from
they're the classics.
The video game.
They're the classics for sure.
Yeah.
I want to go. This is where I actually had the movies slated in. I was going to talk about the movies, but the X-Men movies in particular have been like some really nice highs and some really terrible lows as far as movie quality goes. What's your guys' favorite movie of all the X-Men related movies?
Right, First Class.
First Class all around. So that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
If you give me Deadpool as an X-Men movie, then I'll throw Deadpool in. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, X2 is my favorite X-Men
X2?
movie.
That was a good one too.
Oh, it's not. Yeah, it's. I mean, the intro with Nightcrawler is probably one of the greatest comic book introductions of all time.
Shout out Nightcrawler because we never got to him, but cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's man. And then, even though they didn't do a great job following up on it, that Phoenix effect in the water at the end of that movie, I'm getting goosebumps telling this story. And that movie's 20 years old. I couldn't have been more excited. I was like, oh my God, we're getting a movie like that. It just, X2, it's on FX. Let me just sit here and watch this, even though I own it on DVD.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Certain ones that I'll watch almost every time.
Especially for the time, though, because the comic movies needed that type of movie to like that and Spider-Man at the same time. Again, the animated series is in the 90s, right? Broke the ground there. And then again, it's X-Men and Spider-Man that are like, this is how movies can go. We can go a little more serious with these. They can be entertaining, not just for kids, but for adults. And like, so X-Men and Spider-Man laid the ground for what is the golden era of, comic movies we got to enjoy.
Sure.
And I'll say it's not necessarily an X-Men movie, but I really liked Logan.
Well, that was my next question. As far as the Wolverine movies, is Logan the best one? I think it's probably my favorite of the Wolverine solo movies.
Yeah.
Going forward, I assume, and I don't know if Marvel's really said a lot about it yet, but I assume that we're going to get the X-Men in the MCU at some point in the next cycle, probably. Do you have a idea of how that might work in? Go ahead.
They had D23, I think, maybe almost a week ago now.
Yeah, about
and
that.
So when Feige was there was no announcement about like
Right.
X-Men, about Fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of disappointed people about that.
Yes,
as
for
well.
sure. And the rumor, and again, I don't know anybody in the inside or whatever, is that there was something about the characters in the movies under contract from the Fox movies until 2025.
I would assume that's
And so they would have to use those characters, which they don't want to. So I think it's just kind of pushed down the line a little bit.
Yeah.
Again, that's just rumor and innuendo. But it would seem that after phase 6 of these MCU movies, that has to be the next step here, because
I would assume so.
People
they're going to be
for years.
the echo is just going to get louder for people wanting the X-Men to show up in these movies, and they've got a couple mutant characters already, in them. So once they figure out, they've managed to finagle the Spider-Man movies over and over again, even though they don't technically have the rights to Spider-Man. So I assume they'll figure that out to a degree. Is there any characters that you would want to see from the other movies, Joe? Is there anybody in particular? I think the Phoenix character or Jean Grey character. And the actress that played Jean Grey, I thought she was. We talked about Hugh Jackman, but I thought she was really
Sophie Turner,
from Game of Thrones. Yeah, I thought she did a good job playing Jean Grey, or at least seemed to be a good fit casting wise.
I just think they're going to start fresh and start with everyone all over again, and it's probably good. Like if the rumors are true that they got to wait till 2025, that's probably a good time for them. If things don't go great for this next phase or so for Marvel and this, the MCU. You got to understand, it sounds crazy now, but the X-Men were a bigger team than the Avengers tenfold. To think that the Avengers were this popular and this big, if you'd have told anyone in the year 1990, 95, 2000, that, the Avengers would be like the top over Justice League, over X, people were like, what? Are you kidding me? And so they have an ace in their pocket, right? If things go bad, they can go X-Men and everyone's in. Because it's still the number one team. It is still the, I think that's what they're holding on to a little bit and starting fresh and doing it. I mean, I really think over the last, 5 years or so with things we've seen in the world, the X-Men are perfect for this time and perfect to come in and update how, we can treat people and how we can look at things and how we can look at differences and how, accepting we are. But yet at the same time, you can see a clear divide with a lot of people in the world. So it's perfect and it's ripe, and I'm just waiting for them to do it.
Yeah, I think I agree there completely. Yeah. It's a good societal comparison, if you will.
I've been saying this for pretty much since it came out with House of X and Power of X, which was like the major thing when Jonathan Hickman did that. And we're going to be working on 2+ years ago now about where they, the X-Men are living on Krakoa in this, kind of world of peace now. Like they've created this island where they're all to themselves and there's no problems. They can reincarnate all the mutants that had died. They came through this whole process. And I've been saying, I think that's how they're going to bring them into the MCU. Where have these people been? All this is what's going on, everything that's happening. And I think they've just been chilling on Krakoa, and then
that makes sense.
Bring them back into the world. And, that's just my little hypothesis about where they're
that would make sense. Let me I didn't write this down, but let me ask you this. If you're talking about the Spider-Man franchise, let's say the original one, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man franchise, the X-Men franchise with the first class and the first, X3 they went through, and then you could even include the Wolverine movies, I guess, in that. And then the Avengers movies in particular. Do you have a favorite? Is the Avengers your favorite just because they were newer and more explosive, or whatever you want to use as a describer there? Or do you like the X-Men, or what you guys like?
I think the big thing with the Avengers was by the time that, Infinity War came around, this world had been built and we had invested so much time into these characters that it was something we hadn't seen 10, 12, however many years, and 15 movies or whatever it was built to a point like this before, to where you just you build and you build and you build and you see who's coming and you see how bad it gets,
You know,
And
people can knock the Marvel movies, and people do, but it's really one of the maybe the greatest. You could maybe argue Star Wars or something, but like the greatest job of building a universe cinematically has ever been
yeah,
accomplished. Like they managed to build this entire world and interconnect it through the different movies that aren't really necessarily related, but they've managed to make this one cohesive universe that's really quite fascinating, to be honest. Even if you don't necessarily think highly of the superhero movie, so to speak.
Yeah, you're right. And that last point I think is the point, because it can't just grab the kids, it can't just grab the people that know the characters already, you know, and I think that's what the Avengers and MCU eventually did. I got a guy I work with, he's 62. He doesn't like any of this stuff, like doesn't know anything about it. We're putting a movie on one day at work, and you know, someone put one in, and I can't remember, it might have been Infinity War, and he was like, he's watching out of the corner of his eye. About 2 weeks later I work with him again, he's like, yeah, we watched them all, me and my wife, we watched every single one. I was like, how'd you like them? He goes, they were excellent. He goes, like, I've never seen a Star Wars, I've never seen, like, because he's just like, that just wasn't his era. And he's like, it was so good. I see why you like this. And I'm like, that's how it worked, man. They did a good job of, you know, pulling people in, just whatever one movie, whatever scene, whether, and the movies were all different. So there was a lot of comedy, there's a lot of spy thriller type stuff, big action sets, whatever it is that could attract you into one, you became invested. And then once they hooked you, they got you for 20 movies.
Yeah.
Well, they did such a good job of bringing in, tying the movies together, even if it was just with a post-credit scene where a character shows up that's completely from something else. And then you're like, well, I got to watch the next one and see where this guy's coming in. Go ahead. You had a point.
I've never seen a theater so invested in a movie as the last two Avengers movies.
Right.
The way people cheered and the way people, I mean, sobbed when the
clips were
snap
out
happened.
there for a while on Twitter of people's reactions in the theater as you know, Captain America picked up Thor's hammer, for example.
Yep.
On your left.
The way people sobbed when the snap happened, and you know, Spider-Man dying in Tony's arms, and
it was.
I mean,
Like with the spoilers.
At this point, it's your own fault.
Yeah.
Go ahead, man.
Now with my wife and my two kids or whatever, and they're teenagers, so it's not like they're kids. But,
right.
Like we're in the theater and watching Endgame, whatever, and you know, it's like the stuff with Thor or with Captain America and the hammer and all that stuff. And you know, when Cap's about, you know, completely down and out of this thing, you know, on your left or whatever, and everybody comes through, and I'm sitting next to my daughter, and I'm just like, you know, and all the teams getting together, and I'm just like, say it.
Yep.
And
I still get goosebumps from that every single time.
I'm goosebumps while I'm telling it. I'm jumping out of the seat. I'm like, yeah. I mean, I'm a 50-year-old man.
It doesn't even make sense, but it's so good. Like, why is he saying assemble, right? But it doesn't make sense in the movie, but it's great.
Yep. Yeah, it was fantastic. Every time I get goosebumps from it. It's I guess we've kind of veered off the X-Men here slightly, but that's all right. It was fantastic. Maybe one of the most emotional, maybe is the right word, scenes of all time or at least any movie I've ever seen. Like I can't watch it and not be all fire. Like I'm ready to run through walls and everything after I'm watching that.
To tie it with X-Men, though, Scarlet Witch was ready to peel Thanos herself. Okay, like she was going to handle him right then and there and lay her claim for people that did not know how strong she was.
People don't know the Scarlet Witch is her powers, I guess, maybe aren't as defined as maybe some of the other more simplified powers. But yeah, Scarlet Witch will mess somebody up.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that I had that I wanted to talk about, and I kind of saved it for the end. We talked about favorite characters, favorite villains, and whatnot. In your opinion, who is the most powerful X-Man of all time? I'll save mine for last, and we might all agree, but I'm kind of curious.
I'm gonna go with Phoenix, and then in my turn, Dark Phoenix. Super powerful. Super powerful. I don't know if you guys ever played that role-playing game, the Marvel Heroes game.
No, but I've looked into it a few times.
Yeah, and it's still out there or whatever. You can like kind of get the cards and stuff out there. Like her card, The power thing goes essentially from feeble strength of something to like shift X, like that's off the chart or whatever. Like when she's Phoenix, like all of her stuff is off the chart. Like it's just like an omnipotent being that is essentially untouchable. And like, I mean, she really was that. So, you know, and then, you know, unfettered by whatever, like as Dark Phoenix. Yeah, she's like super, super powerful.
Yeah.
Joe, Phoenix for you, or you got somebody else?
Well, she's obviously the strongest, but is that even, what's that worth when it's ultimately the annihilation of an entire planet if she gets all the way to that point? You know, it's not applicable. She can't really help you. Like it's like having a carrying around a nuke with you to a battle. Yeah. Like just don't just be Jean for a while. All right, just don't actually do anything, which is still pretty strong. She's still strong on her own. But like,
Marvel Girl is really powerful herself.
Just don't flip the switch because we don't need that, right? So like, the science of Magneto's powers should be even greater than they are. Like he could fuck up the whole rotation of the Earth if he wanted to. Like the science of it would be like he's holding that nuke to you know Earth's head and saying, listen, leave us alone, or I can. Everything you know in this world, everything you feel in your body, I can mess with right now easily. And like and he's cool and calm in that moment. That's powerful. That is power. And you know, so I would just nominate that as like, I don't even think people even understand. It's not just controlling metal. It's not just magnetic waves. It is everything you know has to deal with magnetic waves and Earth.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There was that story. I'm sorry. There was that story that when I think it was after Peter, like Colossus's sister, died or whatever, and he showed up to the funeral and he froze everybody in place because of the iron in their blood.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like, no, they can't move because I can control you that way. Yeah, Magneto's.
Well, everything has magnetic fields. It doesn't even have to be metal. Like honestly, he should be able to move anything just because he can move magnetic fields in a room. It's telepathic at that point. It's limitless.
Yeah, they've. I mean, it's really, and there's probably a reason why, because you know you're making basically an omnipotent being that can't ever be touched, which would kind of defeat the purpose of having a fight because it would be over.
Yeah,
pretty much instantly. But there's definitely some unexplored area there that they could kind of delve into if they wanted to. Blake, you got somebody other than that you want to throw out?
I'm just going to throw them out because of how them as themselves isn't the most powerful, but the way that Rogue, if she gets her hands on you, can take those powers and then they're hers is
scary.
No, it's scary. Would she know how to? If she took Jean's powers, would she know how to become the Phoenix? I don't know. I don't know that she would know how to control all the different powers, but then she also gets their memories, so maybe she does.
There's a few of the newer X-Men too, and newer X characters that have some pretty, and I haven't got into the newer comics yet, obviously, but I know Hope Summers basically has the power to steal your powers.
Yeah.
So theoretically, she's going to be as strong as she wants to be. A character that I really enjoy. She's not. I wouldn't put her on the most powerful list, but I did want to mention her because I didn't bring her up earlier. But is Colossus's sister, Magic? I think she's really awesome character. Cool. Yeah, she's got a really cool backstory and a power kind of power list too. I interrupted you, Blake. Go ahead.
No, I didn't say anything.
Oh, I thought you were. I didn't think you were done with your story.
Oh no, you're fine.
Rogue.
Like I said, Rogue just as herself isn't up anywhere near Magneto and Jean's power level. No. But if she is able to steal, their power, then that's a game changer.
They've got I don't know exactly when they kind of redefined it. I think it's when they started the Krakoa storyline. They've got the classifications of the mutants now that they kind of go by, and the Omega level is the highest level. Yeah. They've got a list of the ones that are on that, and I know Phoenix is on it, and I believe Magneto's on it as well.
Storm is an Omega level mutant.
What's that?
Storm is an Omega level.
Oh yeah, Storm. Iceman is an Omega level.
Yeah.
There's I think 18 of them or something like that. Professor Xavier is not on the list as an
Wow.
Omega level mutant. Any theories on that?
No, but that's interesting. Here, it's one that we didn't mention, that super strong Franklin Richards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't mention. I did a little research before we
Okay.
did the show. Apparently, and I didn't know this. I haven't, like I said, I haven't read a lot of the newer ones because I've been reading the older stuff. But apparently, Franklin Richards is not actually a mutant.
They took it from him.
Yeah,
This is mutant rights now, man. That's enough. We've taken enough.
I'm curious how they'll use him in the movies if they bring him in as well. But yeah, he's no longer a mutant. Apparently, he was just using his reality warping power to make everybody think he was a mutant. So he was actually not.
There was a X-Men Fantastic Four crossover. It's probably been about maybe about a year ago or so.
Yeah.
We reviewed it on the show. Yeah, as my buddy called it, Franklin was a cultural appropriator. Mutant culture. So, yeah.
Excuse me. That's good.
No longer a mutant though.
Yeah, no, he's been eliminated because he was on. I kind of looked at a few lists just to get an idea of where other people were at, and he was second on most of them, with the caveat that he's actually not a mutant anymore.
I was going to say, because I just Googled Omega level mutants and he's on there, and I'm like, yeah, that he would be, if he was, then he'd be pretty strong.
If he would maybe be one, or at least 1A with Jean Grey, because if you go back through his history, he's completely changed the the universe multiple times, including and being involved in the Onslaught saga pretty heavily at the end that we talked about earlier. That's all I have that I kind of wanted to get opinions on. We'll kind of leave it there. It's been almost an hour, so people may want to start getting ready for bed at this point. If you got to work tomorrow, I appreciate you guys coming on. Definitely go follow all these guys on Twitter. Blake BMeek23.
Yep.
Joe Goodberry's very easy to find if you're not already following him at Joe Goodberry, and the Marvel Hacks for and then the show, man. Is it, you said Brothers Comics is the name of the show?
Yeah, the Marvel Hacks is like a part of that. That's all our comic book stuff. Like
okay, yeah. Go find the show. Is it on YouTube? Where can you find it at?
Yep, YouTube for sure.
Okay. Yep, go find him and check that out. I'm going to go take a look myself as soon as I get a chance. I love comic book stuff, as you can tell. And we'll get everybody out of here. I appreciate everybody that is tuning in or will tune in later on. We'll be up on YouTube. You can look at it on Twitch as well. And stay tuned. Next week, I'll have a different topic and some different guests. And hopefully we'll have these guys back on. I'll do another comic book show. Maybe next time we'll hit Avengers. Or maybe we'll do some DC stuff. There you go. You could probably have an entire show just going through Joe's comic book memorabilia
I dropped
stuff.
his cigar down here somewhere. That's why.
Oh, good grief! Joe's got himself on fire. Joe might not be on the next episode. He's going to he's going to start developing some mutant powers of his own here in a second when he's on fire. All right, guys. Appreciate you. We'll see you next time. Tune back in and have a good night.